Close to the evening, with the sun tiredly descending toward the horizon, a strange creature walked out of the colorless remains of the labyrinth, if walking was even the right word. Dragging its legs in the sand, the creature somehow floated forward without moving them. It looked like a carapace centurion, or at least a close approximation of one. All the necessary parts were in place. The creature had a black carapace with a menacing crimson pattern on it, a humanoid torso, 8 segmented legs, and 2 arms ending with formidable bone scythes. However, all these parts looked mismatched and strange, as though put together by some clumsy sculptor. Additionally, the centurion moved as if it was seriously drunk. The carapace was careening to one side, sometimes scraping against the sand. The torso was swinging back and forth for no apparent reason. The scythes were awkwardly lodged behind the creature's back, crossed against each other at a strange angle. At some point, one of them simply dropped to the ground. The centurion stopped and hesitated for a few seconds, as though unsure what to do. Then it left its scythe arm behind and continued on its way as if nothing had happened. A perceptive observer would have noticed that the creature seemed to possess 2 shadows. The first shadow was as one would expect, its shape identical to the creature itself. The second one resembled a human. It briefly showed itself from beneath the larger shadow when the centurion abandoned the runaway limb. The human shadow then proceeded to facepalm and shake its head in utter contempt. The whole situation was nothing short of being completely bizarre. But, for better or worse, there was nobody around to notice the weird creature. Unobstructed, it traversed the wasteland, moving in the direction of the Ashen Barrow. Soon, it was almost at the footstep of the tall hill. The sunset was approaching. The strange centurion dropped heavily to the ground at the base of the Ashen Barrow and stopped moving completely. Awkward and lopsided, it looked like a parody of the other monster of its kind who had kneeled gracefully at the same spot a few days prior. Additionally, it arrived without a tribute. There was no transcendent soul shard in sight. Added to the disrespectful pose, this transgression was more than enough to get the centurion killed. Perhaps it was suicidal. On top of the barrow, the carapace demon moved and rose from the ashen sand. His shining armor glistened, reflecting the light of the setting sun. Encased in bright metal, with a crown of horns adorning his head, the demon looked fearsome and sinister. Gazing down, he lingered for a few moments. 2 dark scarlet embers ignited in the depths of the demon's eyes. Shifting his terrifying scythe, the giant monster walked forward, slowly descending from the hill to face the strange visitor. The ground shook as he approached. However, the bizarre centurion did not even flinch. In fact, it remained completely motionless. The carapace demon stopped some distance away from the suspicious creature. He observed it, clearly understanding that its pathetic appearance might be a trap. The labyrinth was full of unimaginable dangers. Rashly approaching an unknown foe was not something an awakened demon, who possessed his own form of intelligence, would do. At least, that was what the 3 sleepers had assumed. However, they were wrong. Just a second later, the carapace demon lunged forward. Its scythe flashed through the air, severing the centurion's torso in half. The adamantine chitin was cut apart as though it was made of butter. The upper half of the monster's torso flew off, revealing only emptiness inside. On the other side of the Ashen Barrow, Sonny, who was running up the slope with all his might, cursed under his breath. That was too soon. He thought that they would have more time. Who knew that the carapace demon would turn out to be such a daredevil? He didn't even hesitate before going all out. With Cassie riding piggyback on his back, Sonny gritted his teeth and tried to run even faster. It was time to switch to Plan B. A moment later, the weird centurion's carapace came apart, setting the echo that had been hiding underneath it free. Pushing the pieces of chitin away with its powerful pincers, the scavenger rushed toward the towering demon. It was aiming to duck underneath it, and hopefully mess up the giant's legs. The first part of Sonny's plan was rather simple. They were going to use the remains of a dead carapace centurion to disguise the echo, which was much smaller in comparison, as one of the officers of the Carapace Legion. Then, they would send it to the base of the Ashen Barrow to lure the demon away. The 3 of them were going to circle the hill and hide themselves under the gray sand in advance, then run up the slope and to the center of the island as soon as the demon had left. The echo was supposed to buy them enough time to climb the great tree and conceal themselves in its branches. Then, Sonny would dismiss the echo, thus finishing the first stage of the plan. He never intended for the scavenger to actually fight the fearsome demon. However, the carapace demon's unusually swift act of aggression had messed up the timing of the whole thing. The decoy was already destroyed, yet they weren't even halfway to the tree. In this situation, there was no choice but to order the echo to attack, hoping that it could stall the giant monster. That way, of course, Sonny was putting his scavenger at risk, but there was no other choice. Just as he was about to reach the crest of the hill, the echo tried to hide itself beneath the carapace demon's massive body. It was doing the same thing that Nephis had done when fighting the first carapace centurion, intending to use the size of the enemy against it. The difference was that this time, the smaller participant of the fight was clad in a sturdy carapace, as opposed to a squishy human girl who had no protection. Even if the demon tried to crush the scavenger with its weight, it wouldn't be able to kill it. However, the demon understood it too. Moving with incredible speed, he shifted his torso and struck out with a pincer. The scavenger was swatted away like an irritating insect, flying through the air and heavily crashing onto the ground. Its carapace had almost cracked. Running toward the great tree, Sonny grimaced. He wanted to dismiss the echo, but knew that it was too soon. They needed more time. Ahead of him, Nephis was already approaching the enormous black trunk. Not wasting any time, she removed the seaweed rucksack from her back, gently laid it on the ground, and began climbing, grabbing onto the cracks of the onyx bark. Meanwhile, the echo was shakily rising to its legs. A stubborn light was burning in its eyes. It screeched loudly, clacking its pincers in the air, and once again rushed toward the demon. "Go get him, buddy," Sonny screamed inwardly, wishing his scavenger luck with all his heart. The smaller creature bravely ran toward the steel behemoth, raising its pincers to attack. It was followed by two shadows, one bestial, the other one human. Sonny was quickly shortening the distance to the great tree. Below the hill, the carapace demon calmly stepped toward the rushing enemy. Its four arms moved in unison. Suddenly, the scavenger's arms were sliced off. Its body was gripped in two giant pincers and raised into the air. Sonny didn't even have time to react. A fraction of a second later, the demon slightly strained its arms and tore the echo in two, separating its torso from the carapace and crushing both halves into a bloody pulp. On top of the hill, Sonny stumbled. The familiar voice resounded like a tolling bell in his ears. "Your echo has been destroyed." His echo had been destroyed. Sonny stumbled and almost fell. Cassie gripped his shoulders tightly and leaned back a little, trying to help him keep balance. With fallen leaves flying from under his feet, Sonny somehow managed to catch himself in time. No, anger and regret clouded his mind, but it was too late to do anything. His trusty scavenger was dead, sliced and torn apart by the giant creature. The ease and brutality with which the carapace demon had decimated the poor, brave beast would have been insulting if it wasn't so terrifying. It only took him a split second. The echo was gone. Not only had Sonny seen its tragic end through the eyes of his shadow, he also felt the subtle connection between them disappear. In his soul sea, one of the spheres of light shimmered and vanished, leaving the silent surface of the water a little bit darker. He had lost his most valuable possession. But the bitterness Sonny felt was not only because of how useful the echo had been, or how much money it could have brought him in the real world. He had actually grown to like the mindless scavenger quite a bit. It was big, loyal, and reliable. It even seemed to possess a strange sort of stubborn, off-putting personality, and now it was dead. Gritting his teeth, Sonny ran like a madman. There would be time to mourn the loss of the loyal echo later. Right now, they had bigger problems.
"Sonny, what happened?"
Cassie's whisper sounded worried and tense. She must have felt the change in his mood through his posture and body language. To be completely honest, Sonny was in no shape to talk, running up the hill at top speed with the blind girl on his back. No matter how delicate and light she was, had been a tall task for him without the support of the shadow. He was struggling to breathe, and there was still a considerable distance to the great tree. However, Sonny had to answer, his voice hoarse and rugged.
"He killed the echo."
Then there was no time for words anymore, because things were turning from bad to worse. Down at the bottom of the hill, the carapace demon was standing above the mutilated remains of the scavenger, looking at them with contempt. Heavy drops of azure blood were falling from each of his 4 upper limbs. Suddenly, the corpse of the echo began to shine with soft light. Then it shimmered and dissolved into a river of tiny sparks, which then fell to the ground and disappeared, leaving no trace of the hulking scavenger behind. Even its blood on the demon's scythes and pincers was gone. After all, the echo was just a manifestation of a slain nightmare creature, and not the real thing. It came from nothing, and was now returned to the state of nothingness. However, the carapace demon was not looking at the unexpected light show. Instead, he was staring at one particular spot on the ground. There, a lonely human shadow was frozen in confusion, uncertain what to do. With the body of the echo, and consequently its spacious shadow, gone, it was instantly revealed and had nowhere else to hide. Crap! The demon tilted his head, then moved with the speed of lightning and pierced the shadow with a scythe. Sonny flinched, ready to experience blinding pain. But nothing happened. The shadow, which had raised its hands in fright, looked down at the massive blade protruding from its chest and scratched its head. It was completely fine. Well, of course, it was just a shadow after all. One had to have a body to be susceptible to such attacks. Right. What else did I think would happen? Meanwhile, the demon was staring at the nonchalant shadow. The menacing scarlet light in his eyes blazed brighter. Sonny was getting closer to the trunk of the tree, temporarily fueled by adrenaline. Otherwise, he might have fainted from the strain already. He gasped. Just a little more. They had every chance of making it. The shadow just had to distract the giant monster for a bit. But it seemed as though luck was not on his side today. Down below, the carapace demon retrieved his scythe. However, instead of attacking the human shadow again, it suddenly turned around and cast a dark look at the top of the ashen barrow, where the giant tree stood in all its magnificent beauty. The bastard was smart after all. Curse it all! Forgetting about the shadow, the behemoth lunged forward, rushing back up the tall hill's slope. It moved with frightening speed, covering a dozen meters with each second. Get back here! Sonny screamed to his shadow as he approached the trunk of the tree. Helping Cassie climb down from his back, Sonny picked up the rucksack that Nephis had left behind and handed it to the blind girl.
Be gentle with that.
Cassie nodded, well aware of the contents of the rucksack, and carefully hung it on her shoulder. At that time, Changing Star had already reached the lowest branches of the great tree. Not wasting any time, she moved to a spot above her companions, summoned the golden rope and threw one of its ends down. Catching the rope, Sonny quickly tied a loop and handed it to Cassie.
You go up first.
The blind girl hesitated for a moment, then accepted it. Just as she was about to put her foot inside the loop, Sonny suddenly stopped her.
Wait, summon your staff.
The wooden staff that Cassie used to walk was actually a magical item capable of summoning strong winds. In their travels, they rarely had a cause to use it, but now it could come in handy. Surprised and unsure of the reason, she nevertheless did as he had asked, summoning the memory from her sea of soul. The wooden staff appeared in her hand. Sonny lightly hugged the blind girl from behind and turned her body, guiding the hand holding the staff in the necessary direction. Then he said,
Now summon the wind.
In the next moment, a strong gale rose around them, blasting fallen leaves and ashen sand into the air. Instantly, a large portion of the island's surface was stripped bare. More sand was revealed beneath. Meanwhile, the shadow was racing against the carapace demon. The massive creature was already halfway up the hill, moving with the speed of a rushing train. The nimble shadow, however, was even faster. It had already overtaken the behemoth and was now flying forward, hurrying to return to its master.
Good, now go.
Sonny helped Cassie put her foot into the loop and stepped back, watching as Nephis pulled the rope up. She was going as fast as she could, which was really fast by human standards. But was it fast enough? Sweating, he counted seconds and waited. His life now depended on whether or not the rope would return before the demon arrives. Every moment felt like an eternity. He could already hear the distant but quickly approaching sound of the carapace demon's 8 towering legs, stomping furiously through the sand. Finally, Cassie was at the level of the giant tree's lower branches. Nephis helped her step out of the loop and settle on the wide surface of the branch, then threw the rope down again. The demon was approaching the tree, still hidden from sight by its massive trunk. The shadow slipped beneath Sonny's feet and wrapped itself around his body. Catching the rope, Sonny practically flew up, climbing with incredible adrenaline-fueled speed. Landing on the branch beside the girls, he quickly turned around and tried to pull the rope up. The monster could not notice the golden shine of it, otherwise it all would have been for nothing. But there was less than a second left. Oh no, Sonny thought, his heart skipping a beat. But then Nephis simply dismissed the memory, making the golden rope disappear into thin air. The three of them crouched, hiding from sight, and held their breaths. A moment later, the furious mass of spikes and polished metal appeared beneath them. The carapace demon abruptly stopped, gazing around with his burning scarlet eyes. His pincers clicked, as if thirsty to tear flesh apart. The terrifying scythes were raised into the air, ready to slash and sever. But there was nothing to kill underneath the great tree. The demon lingered, looking right and left. Then he raised his head and looked up. Thankfully, the branch the three sleepers were hiding on was very wide, more than enough to hide them from his sight. They remained motionless and silent, afraid to produce even the smallest of sounds. After a while, the behemoth finally lowered his gaze and carefully observed the ground, looking for the traces of possible intruders. However, the ground was clean and bare, all signs of their passage erased by Sonny with the help of Cassie's staff in advance. Not finding anything, the carapace demon had no choice but to walk away, moving on to explore other parts of the island. Sonny was finally able to exhale. Some distance away, the demon reached the edges of the area affected by the magical gale. There, he finally found 2 sets of footprints, one left behind by Nephis, the other one by Sunny. With an angry roar that sounded like the clamor of tearing metal, the giant creature rushed down the slope of the ashen barrow, following the footprints to the wasteland beneath. However, the gray desert was desolate and empty, with no living creature in sight. It was colored crimson by the setting sun. At that moment, the ground shook slightly, and a thunderous rumble resounded throughout the labyrinth, bringing with it chilling wind and the smell of salt. The dark sea was returning. Throwing one last hateful gaze toward the wasteland, the carapace demon turned around and slowly headed back to the top of his barrow. Sunny, Nephis, and Cassie sat on a branch of the great tree, waiting for the sun to set. The branch was wide enough to accommodate twice as many people, so they weren't worried about being spotted from the ground. Still, they remained silent and motionless, wary of the giant monster that sometimes appeared beneath their hiding place. The sound of his footsteps sent shivers through the tense bodies of the 3 sleepers. Not once since coming to the Forgotten Shore had Sunny hoped for the night to come faster. But there was a first time for everything. They could only proceed with the next step of the plan, after darkness had fallen, so there was nothing to do now but wait. Sitting with his back against Neph and Cassie, Sunny stared into the distance and tried not to think about anything. Obsessing over past mistakes and future risk was only going to dampen his resolve, and it was already in short supply. Meeting a setback so early into the plan really threw Sunny off his game. He still couldn't recover from the sudden loss of the precious echo. Of course, he knew beforehand that many things could go wrong. In fact, he had even warned the girls that there were too many unpredictable elements, and thus it was impossible to reliably predict their chances of success. Nevertheless, he had not expected to lose the strongest member of their group at the very beginning. The first stage of the plan was supposed to be the safest. Things to come were going to be much more dangerous. Sunny looked at the darkening skies, barely visible through the thick canopy of the great tree's crown, and listened to the noise of the rising sea. In the dim twilight, Cassie shifted a little, and then gently squeezed his hand. Her warm touch made Sunny tense up, but then, realizing that the blind girl was just trying to console him, he allowed himself to relax. Stupid, what am I, a kid? Holding hands will not solve anything. But, despite these grumbling thoughts, Sunny reluctantly realized that he did feel a bit reassured, with no logical reason at all. Maybe they were going to pull this off after all. If this was their will, who dared to stop them? Soon the night descended, drowning the world in absolute darkness. The ashen barrow had become an island in the black, undulating void of the dark sea. The branches of the great tree swayed gently in the darkness, their vibrant scarlet leaves now indistinguishable from the obsidian surface of the wood. The leaves whispered and rustled, creating a calming melody in the threatening murmur of the surging waves. Sunny sighed, knowing that the moment of truth was approaching. He was sure of his plan as far as it was possible to be sure of anything in this cursed place. But he also knew all the risks and all the things that could go wrong. At the end of it all, they were still tossing a coin, hoping that its fall was not going to spell their doom. He felt Neph's position shift. She turned her head and glanced in his direction, a calm expression on her face. Today, her inexplicable ability to remain composed in any situation, no matter how dire, was especially frustrating. Even though Changing Star could not see anything in the pitch-black darkness of the starless void, she knew that he would notice her questioning look. Sunny closed his eyes, then opened them again and slowly exhaled.
Let's begin.
The 3 of them moved, performing a rehearsed set of motions. Cassie carefully shifted to the side, giving Sunny and Nephis space to do what needed to be done. Sunny gently placed the seaweed rucksack between himself and Neph, then opened it. His motions were slow and cautious. Inside the rucksack, 2 large clay containers lay surrounded by several layers of soft seaweed fiber. These jars were made by Sunny himself, and as such were not particularly sturdy. After all, he wasn't a craftsman. All his knowledge about pottery was received in a single day of listening to Teacher Julius's rants about the importance of clay in the development of human civilization. Still, he at least remembered the basics. Inside the jars, all the oil they had gathered from the centipede monsters splashed around, making Sunny's heartbeat unsteady. A centipede monster had 2 sacs in its body, each containing a different oily substance. When mixed, these substances produced an incredibly corrosive, deadly oil that could eat through a scavenger's carapace in seconds. It was also highly flammable. The jars contained the 2 components of the centipede oil. If they were to break during their run to the great tree, allowing the components to mix, well, there was a reason why the rucksack was entrusted to Nephis while Sunny carried Cassie despite his inferior physical endurance. The centipede oil was the centerpiece of his plan. Placing the clay jars on the branch, Sunny took out one last thing from the rucksack. It was a makeshift torch made out of bone and, more seaweed. Traditionally, torches were supposed to be made out of wood, but on the Forbidden Shore, bones were much more easily found than sticks. In the darkness, he found Neff's cool hand, took it into his own, and then placed the torch on her open palm. At that moment, Sunny couldn't help but remember the other times. Changing Star's hands had touched his body. The first time was when he was dying, his chest crushed by the Carapace Centurion's bone scythe. The other time was on the day he handed her the Starlight Legion armor and learned about her cruel flaw. Both days were very memorable, although for different reasons. He had a feeling that this day was also going to be forever etched in his memory, provided they lived to see the morning Sunny deeply inhaled.
I'm ready.
Nephis nodded and then rose to her feet. Standing tall, she grasped the torch and closed her eyes as though praying. Clad in white armor, with her silver hair dancing in the wind, she looked like a beautiful, solemn angel. Then, white radiance ignited beneath her eyelids. In the next moment, bright fire burst from beneath her hands, igniting the top of the torch. Changing Star opened her eyes, extinguishing the light shining in them, and raised the torch high above her head. In the lightless world, this single small flame looked like a lonely star drowning in the sea of darkness. Simultaneously, Sunny stepped to the edge of the branch, inhaled deeply, and screamed at the top of his lungs.
Hey, asshole, come get me if you dare.
Then, all hell broke loose. Attracted by the sudden burst of light and Sunny's belligerent cries, the Carapace demon appeared out of nowhere in a storm of fury. Its towering legs tore through the ashen sand, throwing clouds of it into the air. Two scarlet eyes immediately focused on the shouting human, sending a nervous shiver through Sunny's legs.
Yeah, right here, you pile of scrap. Come and get it, fat lobster. This is my island now,
he shouted, pretending to not be scared out of his wits. The demon dashed toward him. This behemoth was as tall as a house, but still not tall enough to reach the branches of the great tree with his scythes. So, for the moment, Sunny was still safe. He was pretty sure that this won't be the case for long, but it was enough time to bring the plan to fruition, if he doesn't miss. Just as the Carapace demon was about to appear right beneath the branch Sunny was standing on, he took a deep breath, aimed, and tossed both of the jars down. The creature reacted with lightning speed, slicing both jars into pieces with his horrible scythes. However, it was of no use. The oily liquids contained inside still rained on its carapace in a torrent, followed by a scattering of clay shards. If anything, it only made the surface of the impact larger, covering most of the demon's metal carapace in a layer of liquid. The two components mixed, producing the deadly corrosive oil which then burned into the lustrous armor. Sunny held his breath. However, the centipede monster's oil, which was capable of destroying the unbreakable chitin of both scavengers and centurions, turned out to be completely ineffective against the strange alloy covering the Carapace demon's body. It didn't even leave a scratch on it. Sunny's face darkened. Nephis silently appeared by his side, raising an arm just as I expected. Luckily, Sunny did not put a lot of value on the oil's corrosive qualities to begin with. He needed the oil for its other quality, its flammability. Guided by the loud sounds produced by the massive monster, Nephis moved and threw the torch down with a powerful swing of her arm. Spinning, the torch streaked through the air like a meteor and landed right in the middle of the demon's carapace. In the next second, the giant creature was engulfed in flames. Sunny did not really expect the fire to be able to damage the demon. He was sure that the behemoth could withstand much more than just simple heat. But now, covered in the burning oil, the Carapace demon shined brightly in the pitch-black night of the forgotten shore. He had turned into a fiery beacon, calling all the monsters of the cursed dark sea to come crawling from its black depths. The giant demon was engulfed in flames, shining like a bright beacon in the hungry darkness of the night. His polished armor blazed with reflected light, sending radiant glints in all directions. Drops of burning oil were falling to the ground, flaring up as they hit the ashen sand. For a second it seemed as though time had stopped. Sunny was staring at the incandescent glow of the fire, his eyes wide, almost failing to believe that they had actually pulled this insanity off. Nephis was frozen by his side, her hand still outstretched after the throw. But they really did, they pulled it off. Sunny never seriously considered facing the Carapace demon in an honest battle. If a battle between a giant death machine and 3 powerless humans could even be called honest. However, their lacking strength did not mean that they could not murder the evil creature. They just had to be smart about how to do it. For example, they could find something stronger to do the dirty work for them. That's why he had concocted a plan to sneak onto the Ashen Barrow, wait for the night to come, lit the behemoth aflame and watch it be torn apart by the terrifying monsters of the dark sea. And now they were halfway to making that plan a reality. Of course, the most dangerous part was yet to come. They still had to survive the attack of the creatures of the black water themselves, and before that, they had to last until the sea monsters arrive. The carapace demon roared with fury, making Sonny feel like his ears were going to bleed. The roar sounded like a deafening cacophony of rusted metal being torn apart by giant claws. Two scarlet eyes shone through the conflagration of flames, piercing the young man with a concentrated beam of murderous hatred. The infuriated demon was out for their blood, and no one knew how much time it would take for the dark sea creatures to appear on the ashen barrow. Sonny was scared that the demon was capable of performing ranged attacks. If not, he might be able to climb the tree to get to them, or try to kill them in a way that they had not even considered. In the worst-case scenario, they would have to endure his rage for quite a while. Looking into the giant's hateful eyes, he sensed that the creature was thinking in the same direction. When the demon glanced in the direction of the great tree's obsidian trunk, Sonny's heart suddenly skipped a bit. However, in the end, cold rationality won over seething rage in the carapace demon's mind. Instead of wasting time trying to get to the three tiny humans, he suddenly rolled on the ground, hoping to use the sand to douse the flames dancing on his carapace. The whole island shook, almost throwing Sonny off the branch. Crap, why did the bastard have to be so smart? For a moment, Sonny entertained the idea that the demon was actually going to succeed in extinguishing the fire before the dwellers of the depths had noticed it. But he didn't have to worry. Suddenly, Nephis turned to face the dark surface of the sea. Her face paled slightly. Sonny was a second late to react, but almost instantly, he too felt a strange change in the world around them. It was hard to describe with words. The rustle of the scarlet leaves suddenly felt quieter, the sound of the waves crashing against the shores of the ashen island louder. It was as though some invisible pressure descended on the world, making everything feel slightly different. Then the air became colder, and a wall of thick fog appeared above the dark waters. The carapace demon had also noticed this change. He stopped trying to douse the flames and rose from the sand, the oil still burning on his carapace. Not paying it any attention anymore, the demon turned to the sea, a sense of grim resignation radiating from his posture. Then it was replaced by dark resolve and frenzied bloodlust. The fog slowly moved, crawling onto the island. Sonny felt shivers run down his spine, realizing that it was flowing against the wind. The sound of waves was now muffled and changed, almost imperceptibly so, and there in the fog something was moving. He could almost make out a figure. It was. Suddenly, Cassie's small palm covered his eyes. With her voice trembling with tension, she whispered,
Don't look. No matter what happens, don't open your eyes.
Sonny froze, obediently shutting his eyes. A cold sense of fright wrapped itself around his heart. He had never heard the blind girl's voice sound like this before, not even when she was recalling her terrifying visions. Cassie slowly removed her hand. Blinded, he could only rely on his hearing. At least that was what he thought until the cold fog touched his skin. Then, in the muffled silence, he heard Cassie's voice again. Only this time, it was distorted and coming from the wrong direction.
Don't look! Don't look! Don't look!
Sonny gulped, feeling his hair stand on end. The sound of the blind girl's distorted voice echoed in the fog, surrounding him from all sides. Instead of growing quieter, it was becoming louder, overlapping over itself.
Don't look! Don't look! Don't look! Don't look!
Then it grew even louder still and turned into a cacophony of screams, crashing into Sonny like a wave, sounding nothing like what human vocal cords could ever produce.
Don't look! Don't look! Don't look! Don't!
Sonny stood paralyzed, stunned by the onslaught of inhuman shrieks. All he could do was try not to fall to his knees, and then when his resilience was almost broken, everything suddenly stopped. The abrupt silence enveloped the world, making him exhale with relief it was over. A few seconds later, Cassie whispered into his ear,
Open your eyes.
After hearing the clear sound of her voice, Sonny was about to do as she told. Then he stopped. What? He lingered, keeping his eyes closed. Why was it so calm? Why didn't he feel the warmth of her breath as she leaned close to whisper into his ear? And how could she lean if he was taller? Sonny froze, afraid to even breathe. Cassie's clear, familiar voice repeated,
Open your eyes, open.
Then, mere centimeters away, it exploded with cold, malevolent authority.
Open your eyes.
But he didn't. A second passed, then another, then one more. Each of them felt like an eternity. Sonny trembled, practically feeling his body aging. Finally, the voice returned, but this time it felt as though it was further away, withdrawing.
No matter. No matter.
Soon he was able to hear the rustling of leaves and the sound of waves again. He could also hear Cassie and Nephis breathing ruggedly beside him. It seemed that they were also assaulted by the terrifying mimic. And also, somewhere beneath them, the carapace demon roared and hit his sights against each other. The loud clamor of steel resounded beneath the great tree, sending an almost palpable wave in all directions. This wave seemed to expel the unnatural fog, creating an enormous sphere of clean air. Sonny still kept his eyes shut. In the next moment, the whole island trembled as the demon clashed with the unknown horror that had been hiding in the fog. Something shattered with a deafening thunder, and the ground shook again, causing the branches of the great tree to sway. With his hands trembling, Sonny outstretched them and grabbed onto his companions, drawing them close. Holding each other, they listened to the sounds of the furious battle and waited. An eternity later, the fight between the carapace demon and the guest from the depths was over. Silence had returned to the Ashen Barrow once again. Sonny had long ago lost the track of time and grew desensitized to the tremors running through the great tree each time the two monsters clashed. Sudden stillness gave him a start. With a slight shudder, he turned his head and listened, trying to discern what was happening. In the quiet aftermath of the terrible battle, Nephis hesitated, and then said in a raspy voice,
"We can open our eyes now."
Sonny lingered before following her advice. He opened his eyes and blinked a couple of times, his vision slowly returning. The pale light of dawn was creeping from the east, enveloping the island in the dim twilight. Beneath them, the surface of the island was torn apart and upturned, almost unrecognizable. It was as though the Ashen Barrow was pummeled by several rounds of heavy artillery fire. And on that surface, damn it! The carapace demon was slowly limping back from the edges of the island, leaving a trail of azure blood behind. He was heavily wounded and in a terrible shape, with several limbs missing and a spiderweb of cracks covering his once pristine carapace. 2 of his arms were gone, leaving him with a single scythe and a single pincer. Most of his rear legs were either broken or severed, forcing the behemoth to walk in a strange unsteady gait. However, he was still alive. More than that, none of the armor plates covering his vital organs were seriously damaged, his metal shell still strong and impenetrable. Sonny clenched his fists and glanced at Nephis, a dark expression on his face.
What do we do?
Changing Star looked down. There was a cold glint in her calm gray eyes. Stretching her arm to the side, she summoned her sword and said,
"Finish him off."
Sonny looked at the wounded demon, a grim look of resolve on his face. At this point, there was no reason to argue. They had no other choice but to face the guardian of the island themselves. Sonny's bag of tricks was all empty anyway. In the end, their fates were still going to be decided by sharp blades. Someone was going to get killed, and someone was going to be the killer.
How are we going to deal with his armor?
Nephis weighed the sword in her hand and glanced down.
"I will break through the armor. Can you create an opening?"
Sonny nodded, not wasting time on unnecessary questions. If Changing Star was certain of her ability to cut through the demon's carapace, he had no reason to doubt it. Creating an opening, that was not going to be easy. Even though the monster had suffered terrible injuries, he was still a force to be reckoned with. His size alone was going to pose difficulties. They would have to bring the behemoth down to his knees before even thinking of carrying out any sort of an effective attack. And he was not just going to stand still under their assault either. But what else was there to do? While Nephis was tying the golden rope to the branch, Sonny walked over to Cassie and lightly squeezed her shoulder. She tried to force a smile.
I take it that the carapace demon is still alive?
Despite the heavy, cold, dark feeling gripping his heart, Sonny tried to make his voice sound relaxed and carefree.
Yeah, but just barely. Don't worry too much. This whole thing will be over in no time.
One way or another, he added inwardly. Cassie's smile weakened. She was clearly not convinced by his clumsy attempt to reassure her. Sonny hesitated.
Hey, have you ever eaten demon meat?
The blind girl was clearly surprised by his question.
What? No.
Sonny grinned.
How about a demon steak? I'm an excellent cook, I'll have you know. I think. Neff had sort of monopolized the preparation of food, so I had no chance to put all the knowledge from the wilderness survival course to practice.
Teacher Julius had indeed spent a lot of time teaching him how to cook all kinds of seemingly inedible things, as well as meats of all sorts of nightmare creatures in preparation for his journey into the dream realm. Here, hunger was as much of an enemy as the fiercest of monsters.
As soon as we get our hands on some demon meat, I'll make you a steak. It'll be the most delicious demon steak you had ever eaten, I promise.
Finally, a real smile appeared on Cassie's face. She gave him a courteous nod.
All right. That's a promise then.
Meanwhile, Nephis was done with the rope. She threw it down without hesitation and glanced at him.
"Are you ready?"
Sonny sighed and closed his eyes for a second, feeling the strength of his body being enhanced by the shadow.
Yes, let's do this.
As soon as their feet touched the ground, Sonny felt a heavy gaze burning a hole in his chest. Glancing up, he saw the crippled carapace demon staring right at him, a dark glint shining in his one remaining eye. The other one was gone, leaving only a bleeding black gap behind. At this distance, the damage dealt to the demon's body seemed even more debilitating. Its carapace was fractured in several places and covered in cracks, each seeping with azure blood. Sadly, none of the cracks were near the vital organs. His horns were shattered, as was one of his front legs, in addition to several rear ones that were either broken or torn off completely. The stumps of his 2 severed arms were pressed tight against his torso to stem the heavy bleeding. The other 2 were hanging to the ground, almost brushing against the ashen sand. The giant monster looked broken and tired. However, it was still terrifying, perhaps even more so than before, because, despite the horrible wounds, his gaze was still firm and full of evil intelligence. It was still radiating madness and bloodlust, which was now concentrated on Sunny and Nephis, the architects of his sorry state. The first beams of the rising sun shone on the spikes covering the demon's once lustrous carapace, painting them in shades of burning crimson. Sunny summoned the azure blade and glanced at Nephis.
Be careful. He's lightning fast.
He was the only one who had seen the terrible creature in action. As such, only he knew how dangerous the demon really was. Nephis nodded, not taking her eyes off the enemy, and stepped forward. The 2 of them walked toward the waiting carapace demon. Sunny was slightly ahead and aiming to circle the behemoth from the right, the side where the demon had both his last remaining scythe and eye. Changing Star was a step or 2 behind him, aiming to circle the creature from the left, the side where his pincer arm was slowly rising into the air. In this battle, Sunny's role was to take the brunt of the enemy's attacks, letting his partner deal the lethal blow when the time was right. Through the tacit understanding that they had developed through surviving dozens of life or death situations, the 2 of them were able to cooperate without speaking a single word, fighting almost as one. This was their main advantage. As they were closing in, Sunny felt a slight shift in the demon's posture. Instantly, he knew that hell was about to break loose. He had warned Nephis about the speed of their enemy, but he also had to deal with it himself. Sunny knew that he was much slower than the giant creature, but he still had to find a way to dodge the massive, terrifying scythe. That wasn't as bad as it seemed. Speed wasn't everything in a fight. Take, for example, Changing Star's training fight against the proud scion of the Han Li clan. Castor possessed an aspect ability that made him 10 times faster than the silver-haired girl, at least. However, in the end, he only won by a hair's breadth. Nephis had almost smashed his face with an unexpected elbow strike. She had been able to catch Castor unaware not because of her fast reaction. With that big of a difference between their speeds, no amount of reaction could have helped her. Instead, she was able to predict and manipulate the opponent's attacks, starting the strike even before Castor himself knew that he was going to end up in the path of her elbow. She was in control of the battlefield, and now they had to repeat that feat against the ancient demon of the Forgotten Shore. Luckily, his speed advantage was not nearly as insane as Castor's. Almost simultaneously, Sunny and Nephis lunged forward, attacking the behemoth from different sides. He also moved, ready to tear them apart. Both his pincer and his scythe rose into the air. Sunny was running as fast as he could, the azure blade outstretched behind him. A fire of cold resolve was burning in his heart. He was ready to live or die by his blade. However, in the next moment his legs seemed to slip in the sand, and as his eyes opened wide, Sunny stumbled. Not wasting the opportunity, the carapace demon attacked. The terrifying scythe tore through the air, aiming to cut the helpless human in half, but it hit only sand. Sunny, who had feigned his loss of balance to bait the demon's strike, easily avoided the deadly blade by jumping to the side at the last second. He wasn't quite at the level where he could predict every move of the enemy. Instead, manipulating the enemy into performing a predictable attack was easier. After all, deceit and manipulation were his forte. Temporarily safe from the threat of the scythe, Sunny dashed toward the demon's legs. At the same time, Nephis had managed to avoid the massive pincer and was closing in on them too. They reached their goals almost simultaneously, one from the right, the other from the left. Sunny slashed with the azure blade, feeling it hit the polished armor and bounce back without leaving even a slight scratch on it. Dull pain radiated through his hands. On the other side of the behemoth's massive body, Nephis achieved more success. She had attacked the already injured front leg of the monster, cutting deep into his flesh through the wide crack in the metal plate. Severely damaged, the leg wasn't able to support the weight of the giant creature anymore. It buckled, sending the demon reeling. At this point, a scavenger or a centurion would have lost their balance and fallen to the ground. However, the carapace demon was too smart and experienced. He compensated for the loss of another leg by shifting his body weight to the opposite side and thrusting his scythe into the ground to remain stable. Damn it! Sunny had really hoped that the bastard would fall down, because then he wouldn't have had to do what he was about to do next. But now there was no other choice. Cursing inwardly, Sonny briefly looked up at the massive body of the giant demon. Heavens only knew how much that thing weighed. Then he held his breath and ducked right beneath the carapace demon's steel abdomen.